My name is Rachel Lippman, and I wrote a book called Changing Dreams. It is a collection of true stories about the struggles and idealism, including inept demonstrations in the streets of D.C., a rude awakening at Bangkok's red light district, the soap opera drama of research on the Great Barrier Reef, and working with every kind of animal, even a mean tree kangaroo. More importantly, it is a permission slip for personal evolution. Chapter 5. I Dream of a Land Down Under. I moved to Townsville, Australia under my own volition, thus leading to my next calling, the intrepid naturalist. Like I said, I really liked David Attenborough. My first few years I couldn't secure funding for my studies and ended up paying for it out of my meager savings and then through a series of loans. I lived off salty, rehydrated packet noodles and transported myself by bike. I soon became a stick. Initially, I felt a little isolated in Townsville, as though I was on the other side of the planet. The news headlines read peculiar things like, "Grandma pounces on crocodile to save terrier." I was disappointed to find the toilet appeared to flush normally despite the supposed Coriolis force that turned things backwards. But then, I discovered this whole upside-down world that entertained me every day. For instance, everything was dangerous somehow, and I was advised by local experts to touch nothing, including the white wall. I eventually discovered this was a palm tree with a vine that trapped me with its barbs when I walked too closely to its trunk. I had to wait a while until I picked the thorns out to free myself. Not only did I have many poisonous critters to watch out for while swimming in the ocean, such as deadly fish that disguised themselves as rocks, but in rivers and estuaries I had to be wary of crocodiles and bull sharks that journeyed upstream. Dingoes, on the other hand, looked like just dogs. Plain, average-sized, innocent-looking mutts despite their infamous reputation for dragging babies into the bush. I was quite disappointed, and I told one so when I strolled past it on a hike. Daylight was a different matter, though. It was so scalding in the sun that if I didn't duck into shade after 5 minutes, I would develop third-degree burns. I couldn't go into the bush without bug spray because the biggest, meanest bugs in the world would attempt to pull me under the undergrowth. That is exaggeration, but still, they were an ongoing bother. The pretty tropical birds congregated in caterwauling groups and would get intoxicated from fermented mango nectar like a rowdy frat party. They would then proceed to playfully hang upside down from power lines, dive bomb passersby, or try to fly through the spokes of my bike tires while I was en route to class. I also discovered that kangaroos were the equivalent of deer in number and nuisance to the locals. If driving at sundown, I would creep along slowly to avoid squishing a mob of bouncy wallabies. My first year was spent taking classes in all things marine biology so that I could get abreast of the research I planned to do. The class loads were intense, and the learning curve was steep for someone who had been working in policy for several years. In between classes, I attended dive classes so that I could become certified for field work on the reef. My introductory dive was disastrous, which was utterly horrifying to me as an aspiring marine biologist. I had just dropped everything to commit to life in the sea, and I hadn't considered that I never spent more than a few hours on the open ocean. Only until I arrived in Australia did I discover that the Great Barrier Reef is many miles from shore. It takes about 3 hours by boat to get to the nearest barrier reef from Townsville's marina. My first visit would take nearly 8 hours to reach. The passengers boarded the vessel Friday afternoon so that we could spend the evening cruising toward the reef in time for a first dive Saturday morning. It can be a bit windy that far out, and this was the season for cyclones and gusty weather. I was unable to sleep in my top bunk because I had to cling to the porthole when my bed went vertical with every rolling wave. I finally swayed my way to the upper deck to behold 16-foot waves wrenching the boat every which way. I clung to the rails along the deck, focusing intently on the horizon. As I attempted to keep myself steady, a French boy approached me. A cigarette hung from his mouth, and his pungent instant coffee wafted toward me. He leaned closely, his stale breath adding to the bouquet, and sagely intimated, "Seasickness is purely psychological. You must overcome it with your thoughts." Excuse me, I thought, but are roller coaster rides a state of mind? Because last time I checked, G-forces do not have a negligible effect on the body. Rather than voicing these arguments out loud, my stomach revolted instead, barely missing his feet. Despite my sickly condition, I was partly amused that the jolting wave movements hadn't impeded his mad scurry away from me. Perhaps he had overcome the law of physics with his mind. Unfortunately, it did not end there. I was committed to that boat for the entire weekend to feed the fish quite consistently. This was my first time kidding up, yet here I was, trying to hoist scuba gear onto my back with a constantly tipping floor in my dehydrated, vertiginous state. After I finally plunged into the fitful water from a height of 10 feet, the waves threw me into the boat and tore my gear from my face. I quickly regained my regulator and repositioned my mask to prevent myself from drowning. Without being entirely ready, our group of first-time divers promptly descended beneath the surface to seek some reprieve from the waves. But the bottom sediment had been churned so much that the water had the approximate visibility of split pea soup. I'd come all this way to get to the Great Barrier Reef, and I couldn't see anything. We had to repeat this 3 times each day. However, on the second day, our captain ended our dives midday and took off for the shore without any preamble. Once we finally reached the marina many hours later, the whole crew cheered and hollered in celebration, "We made it back alive!" In response to my confused look, a deckhand clarified, "The wave action removed the main anchor and a piece of the boat with it." As a green diver in every sense, I had not realized conditions were imminently dangerous. I thought I was merely being soft. I had just become acquainted with the Aussie cowboy mentality. The following week, I huddled in my new home as a major cyclone flooded Townsville and leveled the town a few kilometers to the north. For clarification, cyclones are hurricanes that turn the wrong way, just like Australian cars drive on the wrong side of the road and their maps are flipped with south facing up. As a girl from Seattle, I thought I knew a thing or two about rain, but nothing could humble me more in regard to precipitation like the tropical monsoons. I have complete respect for the sheer force of the sky opening, not with mere droplets, but with solid walls of water. Spontaneous rivers flowed where only dry land existed moments before. I let my roommate's terrier out, and in the span of the little guy marking a tree, the yard was completely submerged. I heard poor Rusty whimper from where he was marooned on the highest step of our Queenslander house, about to make a swim for it. The other new development with the seasonal floods were the crocodiles turning up in the oddest places. In my mind, one should not have to be concerned about being eaten on their walk down the street to the shops. But I was adapting to a new life, and respect for the wildlife comes with it. As though the weather wanted to make up for the anguish it had caused, the skies cleared and showed in their utmost glory. The sea was placid. And because I was so determined to be this new version of myself, I tried again at scuba. The next dive was on a shipwreck, 90 feet below the surface, during the anniversary of its sinking from, not coincidentally, a cyclone. This also was my 26th birthday, and I couldn't have been in a better place. Finally, the Great Barrier Reef, my gift to myself. Aside from a jellyfish swimming into my mouth and giving me luscious lips a movie star would covet, it was by far the most exhilarating experience of my life thus far. I cozied up to a toothy, smiling barracuda, the size of a kayak, who the crew fondly called Elvis. I nearly bumped into a reef shark when I was distracted by a pretty fish, noting to myself to watch where I was going. I drifted near cantankerous groupers the size of Volkswagen bugs, venomous sea snakes that entirely too curious and cuddly for my liking, eagle rays my size, not saying much at my astonishing 5'2", and numerous lumbering sea turtles. A fellow diver later shared his encounter with a 12-foot bull shark, and I was a bit unsettled that I hadn't even noticed it. We also dived at night. I'm not sure if the boat crew thought this was a funny April Fool's joke, but we were outfitted with dim, cheap flashlights and glow sticks. With over a dozen divers, the reef resembled an underwater rave. I was elated to find the shark eyes glow green if I blinded them with my light, which they didn't appear to like very much. I could see the crustacean eyes reflecting tiny red sparkles in the inky darkness. The moray eels launched themselves at anyone who dared to illuminate their hiding spots. Then my buddy and I were swept down current into the black abyss during a navigation practice, with our flashlights were no match for. We finally surfaced a quarter of the mile from the boat. My dive buddy began hyperventilating at our predicament. Oddly, I did not find this to be so terrifying. I jokingly reassured her I would use my trusty skills of flashlight Morse code to signal for help. My strobe effect seemed to work because someone on a dinghy came to our rescue, and we made it back to the liveaboard to tell the tale. Before I could be certified to scientifically dive for my research, I had to acquire enough experience underwater, 30 hours to be precise. I had a little money saved up for things like food and rent. Instead, my new friend Cammie convinced me to travel to Vanuatu together. She reasoned that we could dive the South Pacific reefs cheaply, as opposed to dive trips in Australia that cost a small fortune. During winter break, we flew to the country ranked at the time as the happiest place on Earth in Time magazine. I'm not sure if I agree. Sure, the people seemed lovely. They were polite and shy and only drank kava for fun. Their worst affliction seemed to be staining their teeth with betel nuts, which is to say, not a real affliction. I suppose the title also came from the pure beauty that many of the Pacific Islands share. To a foreigner, it may seem idyllic to live in such a sublime place, but I did wonder if the islanders may have preferred electricity and running water. I remember one dinner when we were trapped at an expat bar because the local authorities had blockaded the road. There was a coup. At first I thought I misheard the reports while lazily drinking some sugary cocktails. Really? A coup? The expats we were having dinner with merely laughed. They're probably a bunch of rival boys' gangs throwing rocks and sticks at each other. Then a local waitress rushed over, flustered. A man killed! Cammie and I sat up straight. What? Killed? The expat corrected. In Pidgin, killed means injured. He probably has a bloody nose. Then what is the word for someone killed in Pidgin? I asked. They call it kill 'em dead finish, he replied wryly. I couldn't help but contemplate how concise English is in comparison. I never did get used to Pidgin, despite my desire to learn. It sounded like English, but with all the sentences disjointed and conveying something entirely different from what I thought they did. The language barrier didn't really trouble me, though. Most Pidgin speakers understood English, just not the other way around. And this seemed to be enough communication to hire a boat and get onto the reefs. Each day, Cammie and I were completely submerged in the magnificent waters without a break. We took every opportunity to explore bays, lagoons, islands, and shipwrecks. To me, this exploration of the coral reefs was completely novel, while not so for Cammie, who was already a cocky expert diver. But I remember her excitement at our encounter with a 10-inch nautilus hovering before us along the reef's steep drop. Cammie was astonished because nautilus are ancient deep-water mollusks, and for some reason, this one had risen to our shallow depths to make an appearance for the sake of biology nerds. Although I couldn't help noticing, it seemed to be studying us more with its creepy eyes than we were studying it. We nearly spent 2 weeks diving the east side of Vanuatu, but for our final days, we took a terrifying ride through the island breeze on a tiny prop plane to reach the west. Cami was determined to dive the famous Coolidge shipwreck. The Coolidge was a luxury liner similar to the Titanic, used to transport tourists around the South Pacific. During World War II, it was commandeered and converted into transportation for the war efforts. It was sunk by the Japanese close to shore, where it again transformed, but this time into a coral reef. For several days, we explored the wreck, at first near the surface, where the reef had reclaimed the bow. But the Coolidge sank at an angle, and the stern was nearly 250 feet at its deepest point. Only expert divers were permitted to reach the stern, necessitating lengthy decompression times and switching to extra air tanks suspended over the dive sites. I was content to explore and penetrate the wreck at 120. I reached 170 and I became lightheaded and then completely drunk on concentrated nitrogen. I had enough sense not to go any deeper. The best part of the ship wasn't the stern anyway. It was the night dive. We entered the water from shore and swam what felt like miles toward the wreck. We were armed with flashlights only as an emergency measure. The dive master asked us not to use them. The water was so clear that the moonlight was enough to illuminate the reef, and the experience was far better without the artificial light. We descended into the water once we reached the reef's steep drop where the ship lay. As our bodies cut through the water, bioluminescent algae sparkled around us as though we were sprinkled in fairy dust. Cami and I playfully flailed our arms around to agitate the water, creating traces of green light with our movements. The dive master abruptly signaled to us with an OK gesture. He must have worried we were distressed or drowning. Both Cami and I used enthusiastic hand gestures to inform him we were okay, and then proceeded to relish in nature's magic more discreetly. At 140 feet, we penetrated the wreck into oppressive blackness. Without any sense of sight, I stopped and just hovered in darkness, lost. Only my breath was audible, and I had no hope of touching anything recognizable. Then I felt my shoulder grasped and myself pulled forward. The dive master must have had some extrasensory ability to see me and guide me along. I was steadily led toward a faint light, and when I reached what appeared to be an opening in a wall, the blackness dropped down. In the hold of the ship, thousands of flashlight fish circulated through the doorways, illuminating the interior of the giant ship in ethereal light. We followed the spectral white orbs that swarmed, circled, and traveled through the length of the ship like a nighttime superhighway until we exited a hatch into the moonlight. We steadily swam across the ruins of the ghost ship. Then we hovered in a coral garden closer to shore to decompress and watch the creatures that lurk in the reefs at night. Throughout the course of that hour-long dive, I didn't use my flashlight once. It was a youthful journey in curious darkness, made on complete faith. If you've enjoyed these little teasers and are interested in purchasing the book, you can find Changing Dreams at Amazon, or please visit the website ralittman.com. That's ralittman.com. Thank you for listening. Bye.